And we're away. Welcome to Podcast Essentials. Today we'll be talking about microphones, or alternatives to microphones as well, for that matter. In the modern podcast world, we don't actually need to have a radio setup like we've spoken about in other episodes of this series.
Mm-hmm.
So today we're going to be going on about what it is you need in a mic, how to achieve what you want with the mic, and the little things you need to do to tweak it for what you need to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a blog post link in the notes underneath this, which explains it in a different form if you'd like to read about it. So I'll start off with what I use and my journey to what I use, and that'll give people some idea of the steps and decisions they have to make along the way. When I started off podcasting, I just used the smartphone and the mics in that. They're actually quite good quality these days in all smartphones, really. There are problems, of course, that you can't always hear yourself talking as you're recording, and they're not ideal for interviews with remote guests. But to get started, it's not a bad way to start. I used an app called Opinion App, which then allowed some editing inside the app when I was finished, and then I could upload it and then do all the other stuff. Unfortunately, because I've got large thumbs, I pulled half of one episode from the middle and put it at the start, and then because we always subscribe to our own shows, I was able to pick up that there'd been a problem. Was able to re-record it, re-edit it, and then re-upload it. So I moved on from that to a thing called Voice Recorder Pro, which is the Opinion app is only available for Apple podcasts, Apple devices rather. Voice Recorder Pro, despite the Pro at the end, is actually a free app, and it's available on Android as well as iOS. And it's purely for recording the voice. There's no editing ability in it. So I use that in the highest possible quality, and you get lots of choices. And then I drop that into Google Drive, and then from there drop it into GarageBand. And again, I was just recording into the phone. From there, I stepped up and bought a Rode Video Mic Me, which is a little shotgun mic, and we'll get into those later, exactly what they are. But it clipped into the earphone jack, and it's very directional. That's what a shotgun mic does.
Mm-hmm.
Only captures sound in a very narrow arc. So again, but I could plug a headphone into the back of it as well, so I could hear myself as I was recording, just to make sure there was no blips or pings or whatever. And that worked well for about 20 or 30 episodes. And again, we just upload that to Google Drive, then I drop it into GarageBand to edit. But then I remembered I had the Zoom. Now, the Zoom is a bit different. It is 5 microphones in this head here, so that you can record on the side facing me, or I could record both sides, and I can do spatial recordings, which are really not of any use to podcasting, but it's a nice little thing to listen to. And there's lots of choices on cutting out the lower levels of sound, the sort of things that squirrels and dogs and things can hear, as well as the higher end, which they can hear but humans can't. And there's about 30 or 40 options, so it took a while to get it set up for my voice. But I find it's really useful. It's the only mic I use, particularly indoors. It's also set up for outdoor work. You can see it's got the windsock on it, or the spoffle, as I like to call them. The Video Mic Me from Rode also has an outdoor function and a huge windsock that goes on it. Dead cat is what it looks like. And there's photos of those on both the Zoom and the Video Mic Me in the blog post at mrjohnmoore.com. And if you hit the blog tab at the top, it'll take you to that post. When it comes to microphones, there's 2 choices. There's the dynamic and the condenser. And to understand the difference, a dynamic is basically just a loudspeaker working in reverse. So in a loudspeaker, you get an electrical impulse comes into the back, it vibrates the diaphragm, and the sound comes out the front. In a dynamic microphone, the sound goes in the top, vibrates the diaphragm, and that's converted to electrical impulses, which are then recorded. These are fairly robust. Quality, according to the people that know, is not as good as a condenser, but they're more than adequate for what we do in podcasting, particularly as we crunch down to MP3. Condenser, the word condenser comes from, it's the old name for what we now call a capacitor, and it relies on two diaphragms that sort of sit together, one set and one vibrates. And the difference between the two spaces is the electrical current that's created. And then that's converted in, those differences are converted into electrical signal for recording. Now, to understand the difference between the two, you have to have a baseline of electrical current in there, and zero won't work. So they actually have to have power to them to maintain a charge to start with. And because those plates are so sensitive, they can be a little fragile. You need to be a little bit more careful with them. But modern building techniques and whatnot, they're getting more robust, but they can be oversensitive. So the Rode that I was talking about earlier that plugs into the phone is actually a condenser mic, but the weight for volume, it's built like a brick outhouse. And so it's fairly secure. Your more traditional microphones, if you're going to be doing outdoor work, I'd be using dynamic. You're just doing indoor work in a recording space. You need to be real careful with the condenser because they're very sensitive. You need to set up your recording space and your recording profiles in your audio editor to just get the voice you need, which is why the shotgun version of them is probably better, because it's only going to point at you and get your voice, in the same way that a shotgun, when it's fired, goes out in a pattern. So the sound coming into the mic works the same way. You'll see reporters out in the field, TV reporters and whatnot, using shotgun for that very reason. It cuts out a lot of the background noise, tends to focus more on them. Depending on how well I've set this up, you will or will not be hearing a tractor in the background at this point, because we're about 20 yards from a main thoroughfare on the farm next door. I don't know if you can pick that up at all, Rich.
No, I can't, John. So you have set it up quite nicely.
Well, that's nice. So both the directionalness of the microphone, I'm only recording on the side that's facing me. I've got it close to me. I've cut out all the low noises. There's a low cut function with the zoom. And I've got the curtains around the room, as well as the throw rug that I talked about in the recording space episode. And so hopefully we're just getting what we want to record. Now, when it comes to actually setting up your space and you're buying your first microphone, I'd begin testing with the smartphone, just so that, one, you learn how to hold it near your voice. Probably one side of the mouth is perfect, because you're not going to get the plosive P's coming in. So if I'm here, it's more plosive P's. And I see on the screen that it just peaked out on me. And it's easier to deal with sibilant S's as well. Probably best, I would say, to always have the wind baffle, windsock, spoffle on there, just as a matter of practice, so that when you're outside recording, if you have to do that, it's already in your mind to be part of the process. And so these are the two I use now, this one and the smartphone with the Rode VideoMic Me. And it's an ideal little setup for mobile work and for home work. Yourself, Rich, which ones do you use?
I've got a Rode NT USB for home use, John. And I'll just see if I can gently bring that around. And it's a low-cost, high-quality mic that really does make a difference if you set it up. It's got a different personality from the other mics that I have used, including Zoom. That I think that's the one that you use, John. That's for at home, at office, because it's a little bit cumbersome to carry around. And I also use a Zoom 5 for when I'm doing interviews, getting interviews outside over at tables and coffee shops and things like that. And that was a question I have for you, John. If you are approached by a first-time podcaster that have got a limited budget and they wanted to do interviews, say, in sort of half noisy places, but fairly quiet in respect of, they can find a small centre or a separate booth in a coffee shop. What would you recommend? Is there one particular brand that you would recommend that they could start off with for at-home use and also outside?
Yeah, it's a fair question. And while Rich was talking then, I dived off and picked up my Rode. This is the Rode. As you can see, it's almost shaped like a gun. So it's a shotgun, and you talk into this end. And this is the dead cap that goes over the top of it, which is really, really effective.
Mm-hmm.
And it plugs into the end of the phone, and you speak into it, and it records on the phone. If you're just beginning, I'd be doing some test runs with the smartphone, particularly with Voice Recorder Pro. So you speak into it when you're asking your questions. You then point it towards the interviewee. They talk into it. I think that way you get to hear what the sound is in the background and how directional you need to be. Maybe step up to the Rode. And that's really good for interviews because it does cut out a lot of the background noise because it is so directional. I use the Zoom in public as well for the same thing because it's got the low cut noise. But if you're going to be recording in a cafe, in a booth even, in a booth you're going to have hard surfaces, so you might get some echo. And you just need to tell your listeners that there's going to be some background noise. I think if we keep our listeners in mind while we're doing things and then let them know when things aren't perfect, but that we've got some content they'll really enjoy, people adjust, people are forgiving, and they understand that you can't always get the perfect situation. But if you've got the perfect guest on or near perfect guest, people will adjust and they'll listen. The Rode mic there you've got on the desk, clearly that's not real good for being in public because of the weight and the setup. I would keep away from the traditional microphones myself. I prefer the Zoom because it one, it looks like a microphone, but two, it records separately. So I've got a separate file, and I can set it up so that you can set it up for music recording if that's your thing, or vocals or narration. So there's so many options, but you need to take time. There was and it's possible to spend too much money on these things. And in fact, the more expensive the microphone, the tighter the setup has to be because it just becomes too sensitive. And you've really got to have your recording space right. By using things that were designed for outdoor use, which is the Zoom, they were built for journalists to use, basically, so that when they're doing outdoor interviews and catching sound bites here and there. So they're set up so that you don't have to have the perfect recording space. The thing with microphones is it can become an ego thing. I just got this and I just got that. Oh, and I got this and I got that. And there's the mine's bigger than yours sort of attitude, which can become a problem. The trick is to always remember why you're recording, and then your tools are set to your outcome rather than I've got a shiny new toy. Would be my way of looking at it. But just experiment if you're beginning. And even I was 50 episodes in before I started using this, and it still took me 2 months, 2 weeks rather, of fiddling with all the setup to get it right. Starting with the factory defaults and then changing one thing at a time and writing down what I'd changed. And it just becomes a long decision tree of what works with what.
I guess the other thing, John, too, is to let first-time podcasters know that you don't have to pay full price. I think you got me my first Zoom mic, which was the Zoom 2, an earlier version of the one viewers are looking at right now. I think it was $40, wasn't it, on eBay? And that is still going. I actually passed it on to Patrick, my son, for his work. And that's still going very well.
Yeah, I've got a photo of both the H2 and the H2N in the blog post so people can have a look. I do mention that you can pick up the Zoom H2 for about $40. The problem with the older model is that the screen's really small.
Yeah.
And if you've got to the stage where you need to wear reading glasses, you will need them to read that. This one's got a much bigger screen on it and a more intuitive design, I think. My fingers and thumbs and things go just where they need to on this. But as I said, $40. Now, I worked my very first class I taught at Sydney Community College in sunny Rozelle. There was a chap came along who just wanted to update his skills, and he'd been recording for a while, and he used a $25, $30 mic he'd bought on eBay in China. And, high quality audio recording devices and $30 from China on eBay aren't two sentences that go together normally. But he's got had a little tripod stand, and he put that on a mouse pad so that there was no vibrational damping and whatnot. And then he just experimented with his space. And he was another one that had discovered the wonder of heavily backed curtains. And then anything that sounds a little bit iffy, any background noises or whatever, they were taken out in post-production, in editing and whatnot. So you don't need the $10,000 gold microphone of certain talkback radio types in Australia. But and remember, your listeners, except if you go video, obviously, will never see your microphone. All they'll do is hear your voice and the voice of your guests. And if we focus continually on what the listener experience is, you can get by with a $20 mic. You can get by with a smartphone. The Rode was I bought that new because it had just come out. It was $76 or something, and it came with this spoffle, which is just. What convinced me was I was watching a YouTube video and bloke was doing some outside recording at the beach, and all you could hear was the wind noise. And in real time, he dropped the dead wombat, he called it, over the microphone, and the wind noise stopped like that. And all you could hear was his voice. Well, you convinced me. So I've used that indoors, whether I needed to or not, but it's on all the time when I use this. So it's a goer. Don't think large sums of money when you begin. Think carefully, though, about what it is your listeners are going to be hearing. Now, when it comes to quality, there's a couple of things to think of. One is the way it connects to your laptop or your recording device. Because I'm recording directly into this, it doesn't matter. But at the moment, this is connected to my laptop through a USB connection. Sound quality people tend to go for XLR connections, which are like a coaxial cable. But to do that, you need to go through something like the Zoom H5 or a mixer board. And the more things you start adding, the more complicated it gets. And the more complicated it is, the more things that can go wrong. Now, when I was recording with this to start with, I was getting a pinging noise until I updated the firmware on it. Updating the firmware removed the pinging. So there's lots of little rabbit holes you can go down to find where the sound, the disharmony in the sound's coming from. But the more complicated the situation, the more complicated the setup, the more things you need to check and the more things that can go wrong.
Yeah.
And if you're not recording a band live, you probably don't need a mixer, would be my feeling. Mixers tend to be used for separate lines for each instrument, or in some cases for each drum in the drum kit. Whereas podcasting is a more intimate form, and it's normally just one or two people, sometimes up to 5, but there are ways around it. But if you're beginning, stay simple and try and keep it as simple as possible so that it's easier to track down errors when they occur. Yourself on that, Rich?
Yeah, good point, John. It is the whole ethos of podcasting, isn't it? A sort of a do-it-yourself type answer to radio journalism, that sort of thing. Not that there's not a place for that, but podcasting is where you can make your mark, tell people what you want them to hear without having to worry about going to the really extreme sound qualities. And as long as it's listenable, as long as it comes across well and people aren't distracted, if it's good enough and it gets the message across, then that's fine. That's all you need. And the point you made earlier about not going for the most expensive mics is also a valid one as well. And you can get a lot of advice on this. I do find, like you, John, that there are a lot of kind of elitist groups and pages and blogs that do talk about the latest, what's come out, what's this, what's that. And then there are others that are sound engineers that do say, though, you don't need that. You don't need that. Control over your environment is far more important than the microphone that you've got. And I think that locks in pretty well with what you've said at this seminar.
I get 3 questions basically from students. It's, where do I record? What microphone do I use? And how do I edit? So, we'll get to editing later. There's, if you go to the homepage, mrjohnmoore.com, there's a link there to a short Udemy course on editing GarageBand for podcasters. Because GarageBand and microphones and all the blog sites, 95% of the blog sites are set up for musicians, as are most of the audio editors. Yep. And so there's a lot of stuff we just don't need. So in that course, I think it's on at $30, but being Udemy, you can probably get it for $10. I just cut out all the stuff you don't need. And if you're not a GarageBand person, you might still pick stuff up because the process remains the same, even if the tabs are different. But editing is something we'll be doing a lot different. We're going into in more detail in a much later session. Okay. Back to the mics, though. Think about what it is you're doing, why you're doing it, and how you're going to achieve it. And if your budget's not that big, and most of us, it's a hobby to start with, we don't have a huge budget. Like I said, I got to the $79 mic, but I paid that for this because it's so specific and it's such a good tool. It's really heavy, it's well protected, and it's functional for what I need. You can make do with the $20 or $30 mic. You can make do with just the phone. This one I picked up secondhand as well. It was $150. I think they go for about $300. And Zoom's still making them. They've been making them for years. They replaced the H2, as we were saying earlier. I think they sold millions of the H2. It was that robust and strong piece of kit. So that when I'm in the field, I have this, which you can't see unless I can tip that. Yeah, there's the handle. So I can hold it and point it to people, when I'm doing interviews. I carry the Rode, the Spoffle, the phone. And I've got 8 rechargeable batteries because the Zoom uses 2 AA batteries to keep it powered. And basically, that's all I carry in my backpack, along with the USB cable, obviously. And I've always got my earbuds with me, and so I can go out and go mobile for under 2 kilos, about 4.5 pounds for those in the imperial world. Don't fret, I think, is the key message with microphones. And test. Once you've made a decision on a mic, just stick with it. Test it in your space, adjust your settings in your editor.
Yep.
And once you're happy with how your voice sounds, forget about it and just concentrate on the content for the good of the listener. Because that's why we do it.
That's the just another point there, John. You're saying about testing for, say, like indoor use. You could try one corner of the room, can be completely different from the other corner of the room because of the acoustics. It's just a matter of finding that spot, setting up, and off you go.
Yeah, and you can adjust as you go. Like I said last time, I've had to record under blankets and in 4-poster beds surrounded by blankets and cupboards, and it's just a matter of removing the hard surfaces, so that the microphone that you're using works in the space that you've got. It's one of those things you just need to fiddle with, and everyone's voice is different, so everyone's settings will be slightly different. And that's one of the joys of the game, is learning how to do that for your voice. And on that matter, next episode is normally Fridays, but I'm off to Cork City on Friday, so we'll do it Thursday morning my time, Thursday evening Australian time. And that's going to be on production standards, so bit rates, volume, any number of things that we'll get into by then. I'll have a blog post up just beforehand so that people have got more sense of what we're doing. But I think we might draw this one to a close. I'll just run over some takeaways on this. I think a dynamic mic is stronger and more robust than a condenser mic. It tends to give a lower quality than a condenser mic. Doesn't need external power like a condenser mic, but the condenser is more sensitive. You can get a shotgun version of the condenser, which is really useful if you've got the power to back it up. And because I use this on the phone powers it, so it's not a problem. I don't have to carry excess. I would recommend digital audio devices above anything else because you've got the SD card in there as well. So you're recording the file separate so that if your computer crashes, you don't lose everything. And if this crashes, you've already copied it onto the phone, onto the computer anyway. So you can still lose it if this goes before you transfer it across, but you've always got that separate audio file you can work with. And
John, just one question. Sorry, John. Yeah, go on.
Go for your life. No, go for your
just
life.
One question before you go, John, about setting recording volumes on microphones. Some of them have inbuilt, some of them you can adjust yourself. Which do you recommend?
I tend to, well, this one has a gain setting on it, and this one doesn't. This one doesn't. So depending again on the tool you've purchased, that's the one you work with. Now, the gain volume, we'll get into that next time on production standards. If it's got one, just fiddle with it. It's just another thing to adjust and to practice and to experiment with. The more expensive, the more likely it is to have a gain on it that you can adjust. Again, it's just something to experiment with. I don't have an opinion either way. Yourself,
okay.
Rich?
Look, it's interesting, isn't it? Like, every microphone seems to have a different personality. I had one microphone that you had to put so far away from your mouth that it sort of took in a lot of the other sounds around. But the one I've got here that I'm talking into has its own automatic gain controller, and that seems to work perfectly. It seems to work itself out just nicely. So I'm happy with that. Being a bit lazy, I suppose, I'm happy not to be able to adjust that.
It's using the tool that works in your space, and that's the key to it, I think. That would be the key takeaway, I think. Work with what you've got to achieve what you want. You know, the old Bear Grylls line, adapt, improvise, and overcome.
Yes.
Okay, well, with that happy note, we'll draw this one to a conclusion with many thanks to Bear Grylls. Don't forget to go to the website, mrjohnmoore.com, click on the blog menu tab at the top, and that'll take you to a blog version of this presentation with a few links to suppliers and whatnot. So thanks, everyone. And
fantastic.
We'll see you Thursday.
All right. Thanks again, John. That was really good.